All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. If you're just joining us, we're going to change our format for our meeting today just a little bit. As I've been getting data from many different areas and learning more and more about how to collect data, I was able to find somebody that's doing another project with data, and I'd like him to be able to share about his project today. Could you go to the next screen? Before we get started, I want to make sure we acknowledge that our regions on lands forcibly removed from Nisqually, Cowlitz, Puget Sound Salish, Quinault, Shoalwater, Chehalis, and Squaxin Island people. If you'd like to share on what land you are on today, please put that in the chat for us today. If you notice, I'm just not quite as chipper as I usually am. I do have a headache today, so I might be a little quieter today. Today, we've got a pretty simple agenda today. We're gonna hear from Dr. Kenneth Olden. We're gonna review those tier 1 supports you guys put in place before winter break and maybe how they went. We're gonna talk again a little bit more about team development and then go over some ideas of maybe some tier 2 ideas where we can have those available for our training next month. Next slide, please. All right, Dr. Kenneth Olden, he is the Director of Data and Assessment for Wapato District and an independent education researcher. And he has been kind enough to come and talk to us today about his project and maybe some ways that you could get some information about your district through his project.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. I am from ESD 105, Wapato School District on the Yakima Nation's ancestral lands. As Deanna said, I am a education researcher as well as the Director of Assessment and Data for the Wapato School District, and I'm part of ESD 105's attendance cohort as well. So a lot of what you've been working on lately, we've been doing on my side of the mountains as well. And as part of this work, I have been working on a large research project to look at kind of the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on student attendance and enrollment. But also I'm going to be here today to share with you some of the kind of tools and tricks that I've gotten through Skybird on how to pull some attendance reports, something that might benefit all of you as you continue to work on this. I'll briefly go over the research study that I am proposing, and then we'll kind of launch into a couple of these reports. But basically what I'm looking at is the shift that we've had from regular standard attendance from the 2016 to 2020 school years, 2019 school year, how this changed when we went into our closure in 2019, 2020, how attendance numbers shifted as we went into our hybrid and online school models in the 2020-21 school year, and then how they should continue to shift to our traditional school models in 21-22. Really trying to determine whether or not there was an attendance rate gap between specific student subgroups. Now, my specialty is Native American education. This is the population I primarily work with here in Wapato. And the population I've worked with for most of my career as an educator and researcher. So while I'm specifically looking at them, I really am curious to see exactly what has happened to all of our students as we've transitioned from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic life. And what has really happened, have certain groups of students not returned to school at the same rate as other groups. Next slide, please. There's two predominantly preliminary research questions I'm looking at. Did the 2019-2020 school COVID-related school closure and subsequent shift to hybrid and online learning models lower attendance and enrollment rates for K-12 students? And we do know for the most part that yes, attendance rates have been lowered post-pandemic. And then attendance enrollment rates for individual K-12 subgroups increase or decrease in lockstep with other student subgroups, i.e. did one group of students rebound and have better attendance in this last school year than other student subgroups. Next slide, please. A couple of variables I'm looking at, very straightforward: attendance rate and chronic absenteeism as defined by OSPI, looking at that 10% of the school year missed. Socioeconomic status, like with many research studies, we use free and reduced price lunch as a proxy for this. And then student race and ethnicity. I might talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the reports piece. But a lot of us who work with Skyward know that student race and ethnicity is always a tricky thing to track. It is self-reported by students when they enroll in school districts, and isn't always necessarily reported to OSPI in a way that's very transparent. So I actually have some things that we do here in Wapato to try to clarify that for us when we were working on reports. Next slide, please. And just for some transparency, here's Wapato's data. Looking at our the 6 years of attendance data that I'm looking at in this report. If we go back historically to the 2016-2017 school year, you can see our different cohorts and their average attendance rates there. Wapato is predominantly Hispanic and Native American. We have a population between 25 and 30% Native American, depending on the year and the grade level. The rest of our population tends to be about 60 to 65% Hispanic, with a 0 to 5% being Asian, predominantly Filipino, some white, not Hispanic students, and then a few students of other races. And our 2 or more race category tends to revolve around 2 to 3%, depending on the year. As you can see from this chart, looking specifically at our Hispanic and American Indian and Alaska Native students, our Hispanic students have always had a higher attendance rate than our Native students. This is a trend that's pretty consistent with the state across the board. And if you look at the 3-year timeline from 2016 to 2019, you see that consistently attendance rates have started to go down, which again, I think we've kind of seen that statewide as chronic absenteeism rates have been on the rise. But there's a pretty sizable gap between our Native American students and our Hispanic students consistently there. As we move into the closure and then into the hybrid year, you see those attendance rates drop pretty dramatically. But then as you look into the 21-22 school year, you'll notice that they start to go back up, but they're not going back up at the same rate. Our Native American students in particular are not attending school as often as their cohorts. And when we look at the raw data, I think it ends up being about a difference of 12 school days more missed on average per student. The next slide is kind of aggregate data. So in this case, I'm just looking at just American Indian, Alaska Native, and then non-American Indian, Alaska Native. You can kind of see the trends a little bit more clearly here. You see the consistent gap between the groups that's widening. You see the consistent gap, the gap that's there present as we move into the hybrid model. And then you see, while we have a rebound effect and attendance rates are improving, there is definitely signs that some groups of students are staying behind. And in the case of this preliminary data, this is about 1,700 students that were consistently enrolled for all of these school years. So it's a pretty sizable chunk of kids. I think for the Native American population alone, it was a couple hundred, which out of our total population of Native American students is about 700, 800, depending on the year. So it's a pretty statistically significant chunk of kids. So this is a research study that I am working on. I'm inviting school districts, whether you have Native students or not, doesn't matter, but school districts that would like to participate in this to reach out to me, and I can work with you to how to create the data and get it to me. And then and then I will publish results for individual districts as well as an aggregate report at the end. Any questions about this?
So what I appreciate about Dr. Alden is that he could pull some data that might be able to allow you to see some of those different categories for you. And he's also really well versed in how to pull the individual data. So we're learning as the state, as we're working on how to pull the data to start to separate it into the categories that Dr. Alden's done. But I'm going to send out this PowerPoint to everyone after today's meeting. If you'd like to reach out to him, he's been amazing to talk to. So I just want to give you as much resources as I can when we're starting to look at getting data for our schools.
Thank you. I've worked with a few other districts in our area. I've actually worked with Sandy Ruiz at Hoquiam, the Native American education liaison there as well, to do some of the work that I'm showing you today. Because as I've worked with the attendance cohort in ESC 105, I've noticed that a lot of people are struggling to identify students that are at risk. They're struggling to identify attendance trends. We all know that it's not great. I mean, it's a pretty clear understanding statewide, but people are struggling with the timeliness and the reporting side of things. And that's part of my job, is to do that for my district, but also to help others. And so anything I can do to help others statewide kind of get a clear understanding of their data is something I'm interested in doing.
Thank you so much. And if you would put your contact information into the chat, people could grab that too. I didn't think about that beforehand. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. I'll do that.
All right, next slide, Cassandra. Thank you so much. All right. All right, everyone. So we were talking in our last meeting. I think we went past my screen there, Cassandra. It might be on an automatic for some reason. About tier 1 interventions. Now, some of you were thinking about some great ideas that you were going to do here in January for kids coming back to school. Some of you had already started some at the beginning of the year. I'm hoping that we could, as a large group, instead of separating into small groups, maybe share some of the wins that you have seen with any of your tier 1 interventions, or any of the other questions I have on the screen here. What helped inform your team of what to try, what worked, or what you would have changed. Is anyone brave enough to unmute and give us a little information about tier 1 supports?
I'll start. One thing that we still haven't hit it as hard as we'd like. But one thing that we are doing is we're getting a few more teachers calling parents when there's students are absent about 2 days, consecutive days, just to make touch base, find out if there's something that they can do to help support them. We've also been able to establish a good list of families that need to call because they're approaching a high truancy rate. That plan kind of came to a halt because we lost our attendance secretary. So we kind of stopped there, but it was in process of becoming something that we do regularly. And then we want to tie it into our PBIS assemblies where we're celebrating student, not only academic success or behavior success, but also their attendance success.
That's awesome, Stephen. Thank you so much.
So this is Roby. I can go. Tagging on to the previous one, we have been doing at our monthly assemblies attendance awards every month, and not just for. We're not doing perfect attendance. We're doing good attendance and potentially improved attendance if we have this. So that's the one I'm looking at maybe adding now that we've had a few months and I can actually have an improvement show. So that's one thing we've been doing. We're in the middle of a school-wide attendance challenge. So we're doing a football challenge tied in. So for the 6 weeks from when we return to school, because that's typically a time where you have a little bit more of attendance issues, to the week of the Super Bowl. At the end of every week, we tally a percentage per class. And every class that scores a touchdown, which is you can have 1 or 2 kids absent, but you can't have a ton of kids absent. Each week you get a touchdown. We just announced today the prize. They'll get a root beer float and an extra recess if their class meets that challenge. And for those that don't quite make the touchdown, but get at least in the field goal range, which is at least the 20-yard line, they get just the extra recess. So, and I talk about it on the morning announcements a couple times a week. I try to remember to talk about it. And every Friday we move the footballs so that they can see the progress that's on a bulletin board out in the hallway. So we're in the middle of that, and we are seeing some pretty decent attendance. We had a meeting yesterday, and what was yesterday, right? Maybe the day before. We had one day, we have only 200 students, but we had one day where we only had 15 kids absent, which is way lower than we have been seeing. So, and I actually heard a parent telling a kid, well, because you also have to be on time to count. So if you're tardy, you don't count for that day. So that was pretty strict on us there. But I heard a parent saying, you need to get to school on time so you can count towards the attendance challenge. So we're hoping at the end that we can get some good numbers and see that it had a significant impact. And we also pulled our attendance team out of leadership and have created our own attendance team that we had our first pretty successful meeting the other day. So
that's exciting. That's exciting, Roby. I love hearing all that. That's awesome. Using the celebrations, using a lot of different pieces we've been learning to really try to get to those tier ones. That's awesome. Anyone else seeing some success with tier one? All right. Well, feel free to put something in the chat if you're not able to unmute today, but I definitely would like to hear how these tier one interventions are going for you and what we're learning from this project so far. As you're implementing these tier one, any tier subject, put in the date in your notes for your team so we can pull that data later. So OSPI will be able to pull that individual data later. So please remember to document the dates of when you started and when you stopped. Okay, awesome. Next slide, please. All right. So we're going to talk a little more about the team. I know a lot of people were still developing these at the beginning of the year. This is an important part about the grant you signed on for, is that you were going to use an attendance team to use real-time attendance data to inform structured supports. So all my targeted districts, this was the MOU that I wrote out with you for the districts that got the grant. It was probably built into the I grant but it's not easy. I've heard all of you, it's not easy to pull together this team or to add it to an existing team sometimes. So just know that this is the research that we're doing, is to show how this team, looking at that real-time data, and we're working on getting you a consistent data that all of you can look at, to not only look at the individual data, but to be able to look at that early warning system that Dr. Alden was talking about, to be able to see, gosh, first graders are really struggling. What can we do for first grade to educate them about how important it is to be at school, or what challenge could we put there to help out those first graders that we now can see from the data that might be struggling. What we're getting to at this point is I'd like to know, and if you guys want to send me an email, or if you wanted to chat with me, what reports are you using to get your attendance data for the individual? I know you can't get to the group ones yet, but what report? Dr. Alden showed me another report that we can use besides the monthly, quarterly, that might be able to be scheduled regularly, where it comes to you regularly, so you don't have to worry about it once you've set it up. And how is your team structured, that it's reviewing the students in need? Do you have the communication system that will give you that feedback? So we've made an intervention, we've assigned that child an intervention. Now, how do we know it worked? So what system have you put in place to get the feedback loop to know that intervention worked, or we need to give them a different intervention because, not all interventions are going to work for all children. And then you don't have to worry about this last question because I have a training next week with WSIPSIs to hopefully be able to look at how we're going to get that early warning data for you, because I know that most of our districts were having a hard time getting to that data. So just know this is what's going to be coming up here soon. If you want to write me an email, or like I said, I'll be reaching out to you to maybe again make another time to just sit down and talk. If you're struggling still with putting together that team, then I'm more than happy to come out and help. We really need to make sure at this point in the game that we're getting that team in place to start doing some of that side of the work on top of the specialists. All right, next slide, please. Anyone have any questions about that process or what I'm talking about right now? I want to make sure I give you guys time to ask questions if you're unclear about what that process should look like. Awesome. I'm glad that I put on this slide here. And like I said, I'm going to send this deck out to you. Here is some resources that could help you. There's a sample spreadsheet that one of the other ESDs has put together that tracks interventions that looks different than the one that Attendance Works is using. Here's a couple videos of sample meetings. So I had a few of you ask, gosh, we'd like to see what other people are doing. So I was able to find 2 sample meetings and mostly they're working on individual work. We know from our team meetings that not only do we have to do the individual work, but at some point we have to start looking at that early warning system to see how we can stop so many kids getting into those attendance problems. The pyramid, if you liked the pyramid, I put it back on here again, so you can easily use that one. It's we've put it up here a couple different times on how to track what groups are doing what for interventions. And then when I was looking at some of the research data, there was a really good report. It's from COVID, so know that it's a little dated, but effective messaging study in that one. If you want to go take a look at it, it had a couple different pieces on how we could be more effective in our messaging to parents. I kind of like, so I threw it up here if you want to take a little look at it later to kind of see what might help in some of that effective communication to families. So that wasn't to our kids, that's to our families. All right, next slide, please. All right, so for the next state training, which is next month, they're going to be discussing tier 2 ideas. And so I thought as a group, especially since sometimes we have much smaller schools, and so it's hard when people are sharing ideas from the larger schools. I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes for us to work together and maybe come up with some ideas of tier 2, or maybe you already have a good system for a tier 2 that you'd like to share at that meeting. So here's our 2 discussion questions. I'm going to send you into breakout rooms where you can do this more in a smaller group. One of the Cassandras is going to stick this in the chat for you, so you have these questions when you get to your breakout room. Do we have those ready? Is it Cassie that's putting those rooms together today?
Yeah, do you want me to send them? They got the questions in the
Yes,
chat
you
already.
can. And when you come back, if you guys, one of you guys could share, we'd really like to kind of hear what these little groups are talking about, so we have an idea of some of the ideas that are coming out of the small group sessions. All right, did we get them all sent off?
Yep.
I hit the recording button. What I do is I turn it off and then I forget to restart it. So I am trying to train myself to get that recording button back redone. Hi, everyone. I hope you guys had a great discussion in your small group. And if you guys wouldn't mind sharing maybe some of the ideas you learned, or maybe the idea you presented yourself, where we could share as peers, maybe some good ideas for tier 2 ideas. Anyone?
I'm going to share Amber's.
Awesome.
She was sharing about how there's this incentive piece for a group of kids and their guitar lessons. So I just love that idea, so I'm stealing it. So taking it back to the team and talking more about it, and maybe reaching out to her person and figuring something out. So I don't know. I thought that was cool.
That is awesome. Finding those creative ways. It doesn't always have to be things. Roby's using a recess. That's awesome. That's an inexpensive thing we can do that can sometimes really encourage kids. Any other tier 2?
This is Roby. One of the things that we just thought that it's kind of tier 2 is hard with this one because it almost goes from trying to deal with the whole school, and now you have this kid that's got a lot of absences, especially in the smaller schools. And it's like, now I've got to jump to working with this kid on his or her issues versus a group of kids that I'm dealing with. So it's almost like it's a fast track from 1 to 3.
I can get that. And it can be a small group. So sometimes in SEL, you realize, gosh, all these kids are struggling having friends. And so maybe you have a friendship group at lunch that somebody's supporting those kids with their social emotional skills. Anyone else had maybe one that's really working or one that they're considering?
My tier 2 kids, I mean, what's been working for me is just checking in with them, showing being present. I'm running into quite a few that have really fallen off my radar in the last couple of months, and seeing them in the hall and, hey, what's going on? How you doing? What's happening? I'm glad to see you here today. Sitting down and saying, you guys going to sit down and talk? Let's try to work it out and see what's going on. How can I help you? What barriers can I remove? And so far this week alone, there's probably about 6 or 7 kids that are now, they've showed up every day, and we're working on towards getting them to removing those barriers that they have. So that seems to be working for me, is just being present and being there.
That's awesome. That relationship building, that's huge. It's hard because you if it's only one person in your school doing it, then that's a really big job for somebody. But if you can spread it out between a group of people, those are great ways to encourage kids to have that adult there that knows they're there and cares. That's awesome. Anyone else? I don't want to skip over somebody if somebody's been holding out. All right, guys. Go ahead and next slide for me. All right, so I'm not going to keep you guys long today. You get to go early, but here's our resource page right now. So you can take a look. We're about halfway through this list of the mandated trainings that you signed on for. I'll include the link to this meeting here. I'll update that soon, but you'll get this before that's updated. So you can see we have the rest of the meetings there. I'm going to send the invitation for next month's meeting to you here soon for the next one I'm doing, which is the March one. Attendance Works Chrissy or Jenna will send you the ones for February. If for some reason you don't have an invitation, you're new to the project and you haven't gotten an invitation to the state training for Attendance Works, please let me know where I make sure that you get on that schedule for next month. On the other side of the resource page here is just some of the same resources that I've been putting up here. But I like to keep everything updated in one place where you don't have to search back through all your notes to try to find something. So that ESSER attendance resource Padlet, you're the only ones that get it. And there's a lot of information on there, some optional trainings that you could do, some resources from other districts across the state. So it's really nice. Attendance Works, obviously, you've already seen that resource. Everyone graduates. Some of you might not have realized that we also have a contract with them, and they've done some training for our ESDs. They did some early training for some of the specialists that might have been hired early. So they actually have some really good information too. I saw a presentation today with them, and they are really showing how this interconnection that we were forced to do during the pandemic is actually having some great benefits, because we've broken down the barriers for exchanging information about students across with universities, with community organizations, where we're actually supporting each other in what we all want is for the student to have the success that they can in education. So it was pretty exciting to see some of the outside the box thinking that happened to really get kids more. We have the district attendance materials and community engagement boards. I know this is for Thurston County, but the board information is the same no matter what county. It's just what the county expects in paperwork will be different. And then that truancy at a glance. This project isn't about truancy, but we work in conjunction with truancy. As many of you have realized that truancy policy helps inform parents of where they're at, but we're trying to redesign, because when we use the word truancy, people think punishment. This is not a punishment system. We want it to be, gosh, how are you doing system? How can we help you system? And so we look at chronic absenteeism, which is excused absence as well. When we're doing our work, it is something that you should be looking at for, like I said, we're still working on that excessive excused absence. This is where we have a lot of students that the truancy system hasn't always caught. And so when those excessive excused absences pile up, how do we make sure that the students get the education that they deserve? I want to tell you that I got invited to a national work group that is taking on these same challenges across the nation. I know this work isn't always easy, but it's something that they're struggling with across the nation. And we are ahead of the game in having this work group that's trying to show how we can utilize resources to help students. So it's been really interesting to hear across the nation the same thing. When we closed down during COVID, we changed students' agency, and they are struggling in coming back and falling back into systems that ensures that they get the education they deserve. So I just wanted to let you know that this is not a problem just in our area. This is happening across the United States. I got to talk with people from Texas, New York, and Louisiana today. All right. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. If I don't see an email from you, I will be reaching out to you to set up a meeting about your team. If you're still struggling with that team, please outreach to me. I want to make sure that we get that piece of the puzzle in place for you. That does help do some of your work. When we are able to redesign those supports to actually help those students you're working with, that's when we're going to see the real magic here. All right. Anybody have any last minute questions or concerns you'd like to bring up?